The ford broke under us at the ninth bend, and I heard the river change its voice before I ever saw the water come. I was running at the head of the run, as I had every rain season for 11 years, a great dark wolf at the front of 1,000. That is what the long race is in the Green Mark. When the first hard rains break the mountains and the river swells to swallow the lowlands, every pack runs the flooding country together to reach the high sanctuary before the crest, and the king runs first, so that his people can follow his line through water that would take them if they read it wrong. I knew that country the way a man knows the back of his own hand. I had run it since I was a pup at my father's flank. I believed that morning that there was nothing the river could show me I had not already seen. That was the arrogance the river meant to teach me out of. The rain had come early that year and mean. It had been falling 3 days before the run instead of the usual one, and the lowlands were already dark with standing water when we set off from the Sablewood at dawn. My marshals said the crest was a day away yet. The old ford at the ninth bend had carried the run for 200 years. It was stone under the mud, they said, and stone does not move. So we ran, a river of wolves over a river of water, and the drum of 1,000 paws was the only sound in the world. I did not hear the girl at first. No one did. She was standing where the reeds grew tall at the water's edge. A slight figure in a Marsh clan cloak the color of wet earth, and she was shouting something the wind tore apart, and pointing, not ahead at the ford, but out at the water itself, at nothing a wolf could see. One of my marshals, a broad gray named Aldous who had run at my flank for years, peeled off toward her. I slowed to watch because a king watches everything. I saw her catch his shoulder. I saw her point again at the brown water, jabbing her finger at it as if the water had written her a warning in a hand only she could read. And I saw Aldous shake her off, not cruelly, only the way a busy man shakes off a child underfoot, and wave her back from the line, back toward the reeds where her kind belonged. I did not know her then. I did not know that the Marsh clan, the Reed folk, were the oldest readers of that country, that they had guided crossings on that river since before my line held the throne, that they could hear a flood coming in the change of a current smell a full hour before it arrived. I only knew what every wolf of the great packs knew, which was nothing, that the Reed folk were low, that they lived out where the ground was neither land nor water, that they ran no pack and held no honor and were never ever seen at the sanctuary feast. I gave her one glance, a Marsh girl, wet to the knee, waving her arms at the river. Then I ran on, and I put her out of my mind, and that is the shame I have carried longest of anything in my life. We reached the ninth bend at the height of the morning. The ford was there, the wide shelf of old stone under the churning brown, and I put my paws to it and felt it solid, and I led them on. Then the river changed its voice. I have tried in the years since to put words to the sound, and I cannot do it justice. It was not a roar you can run from. It was a deep, grinding, sucking groan that came up through the stone into my very bones, the sound of the whole weight of the mountains arriving at once, and in the half-heartbeat it took me to understand it the ford was simply not there anymore. The stone had held 200 years, and the early rains had worked beneath it, and it went all at once, a whole shelf of the world dropping away, and the river that had been spread wide and shallow gathered itself into the gap and came through in a single dark wall. It took the middle of the run. I will not pretend to you that I acted well in that first moment. I was flung off my paws and rolled, and I fought only to keep my own head above the brown, the way any drowning creature fights. The screaming had started behind me, the high, terrible sound of wolves in water they cannot beat, and the wall of the flood swept 100 of my people off the broken ford and out into the drowned country like leaves. I got my paws under me on a rise of ground, and I stood there streaming and shaking, and I looked back at the killing water, and my heart went to ash. They were everywhere in it. Wolves I had known all my life, spinning in the current, going under and not coming up. And smaller shapes among them, the young runners, the yearlings making their first race, and out past them all, carried furthest and fastest because he weighed the least, a cub. A gray scrap of a thing, one of the sanctuary-born pups who should never have been near the front, turning over and over in the brown with his small legs working at nothing. I did not decide to go back for him. There is no deciding in it. He was a pup of my kingdom in the water, and I was his king, and I went. I have been called in my time many hard things and a few kind ones, but no one has ever called me a coward, and I tell you I went into that flood after the cub with everything I had. I reached him. I got my jaws in the loose fur of his scruff, and I turned for the rise with the pup swinging from my mouth, and for one breath I thought I had him, I thought I had won it. And the river took my legs. Something struck me underwater, a whole tree by the weight of it, driven end-on by the flood, and it caught me across the ribs and drove the air from me and folded me around it, and the world turned to brown and thunder. I did not let go of the pup. I remember that. Through everything that came after, I have held to that one thing, that even as the water closed black over me, I did not open my jaws. I felt his small weight there against my teeth. And then the current rolled me down into the dark, and my ribs were broken, and there was no up and no down, only the roar and the cold and the last of my air leaving me in a long silver rope toward a surface I could no longer find. I thought then quite clearly, so this is how a king dies, not in his hall, not old by his fire. In the brown water of the ninth bend with a pup in his teeth and no mate ever found, and the throne going to a cousin, and the girl in the reeds had known, she had known, and I had waved her off. That was the last thought I owned. The dark came up over it. I want to tell you what happened next, and I can only tell you what I felt, because I was past seeing. You must understand that a drowning man loses the world in pieces and gets it back the same way, and for a long while the pieces make no sense at all. The first piece was pressure, a grip on the loose skin at the back of my neck, not jaws, something narrower and stronger than it should have been, fingers, a hand, and a great steady hauling, a pull that would not quit, dragging me up and up through water that did not want to let me go. I felt the pup lifted from my teeth. I remember grieving that in my drowning way, thinking they had taken him from me too, not understanding that he was being set safe on the bank. And I remember the grip shifting to me, both hands now, fisting into the fur over my shoulders, and the pull beginning again, and a voice above the water saying words I could not hear but could somehow feel, low and steady and unafraid, the way you speak to a frightened animal to keep it from thrashing. The second piece was air. It came into me wrong, forced, a burning rush that tore up out of my chest full of river, and I turned my head and the water came out of me in a flood of its own, and I lay on something solid at last, the mud of the bank I know now, and shook and could not see and could not stand, and could barely hold to the thread of myself. Every breath was a knife between my broken ribs. The cold had gone all the way into the center of me, that killing cold that is not on the skin but in the blood, and I could feel it stopping me, slowing me the way the river had wanted to. And through all of it, holding me to the world, there were the two hands and the low, steady voice. They did not stop. That is the thing I have never been able to say without my own voice failing. Whoever this was, this narrow, strong person crouched over a half-drowned wolf twice her weight in the freezing mud with the flood still tearing past a foot away and more wolves screaming in it. She did not stop. She pressed her body along my side to give me her warmth. She worked my chest with her hands to keep the beat going in it. She breathed for me when I could not breathe for myself. Again and again, patient past all reason, her forehead pressed to my wet skull between times, murmuring, and I clung to the sound of it the way I had clung to the pup, because it was the only thing in the whole roaring dark that was steady. I did not know her. I could not see her. I did not know she had been the girl in the reeds, or that she had dived into that flood the moment it broke and pulled one drowning wolf after another to the bank with those same two hands, a dozen of them, and more, working down the line as the current brought them, hauling out the yearlings and the marshals and the sanctuary-born who could not beat the water. I did not know I was the 15th she pulled out that day, and the heaviest and the closest to gone. I did not know that she had no idea whose life she was breaking her own strength to hold, that under all that river mud and broken fur I was only, to her, one more wolf the flood had tried to take, and therefore the whole of her work in that moment, and worth every last thing she had. I only knew the hands, and the voice, and the warmth she was pouring into me out of her own body, and that somewhere in the black behind my eyes the killing cold began, very slowly, to lose its grip. And then I cannot tell you how long it was. It may have been a minute, and it may have been an hour. The world gave me back one more piece. My eyes came open. She was kneeling over me in the mud, and she was soaked to the bone, and she was the girl from the reeds. I knew her at once, and the knowing went through me like a blade. The Marsh clan cloak, the color of wet earth, now black with river. The narrow, weathered face I had glanced at for half a heartbeat and dismissed. Her dark hair was plastered flat and streaming, and there was a long red graze down one cheek where the flood had thrown her against something, and her lips had gone gray-blue with the cold she had spent on me, and her eyes, when they found mine open, filled with a fierce, tired relief that had nothing in it of who I was. She did not see a king. She saw a wolf that had been dead a moment ago and was not dead now. That was all. That was everything. "There," she said, and her voice cracked on it, spent. There you are, stay with me now. And that was when the bond struck. I had waited 11 years for it. Every rain season I had run at the head of the long race, half hoping I would catch the 1 cent that was meant for me somewhere in that 1,000. And every year I had reached the sanctuary alone, and I had stopped, somewhere in there, truly believing it would ever come. My council had brought me their daughters and their allies' daughters, and I had been courteous, and I had felt nothing, and I had made my peace with a cold throne. I thought I knew what the bond would be when it came, because I had heard other wolves speak of it all my life. A thunderclap, they said, a howl rising up in you, the whole world going bright. It was not that. For me, it was the opposite of that. For me, the bond came as silence. All my life the river had roared in me, not that river, but the one every powerful wolf carries, the ceaseless noise of being what I was, the weight of the crown and the watchfulness and the long, grinding loneliness I had learned to call peace. It had roared so long I no longer heard it as sound. It was simply the water I swam in. And when I looked up out of the mud into the face of the Marsh girl who had breathed my own life back into me, it all went still. Every roaring thing in me stopped at once, the way the whole clamoring river will fall dead quiet in the half-second before a flood. And into that great new silence there came one clear, quiet certainty, settling in the center of my chest like a stone finding the bottom of a still pool. Her. It was always going to be her. I could not move to tell her. I could not speak. I was a wolf half-drowned on a riverbank with 3 broken ribs, and I could not even lift my head. I could only lie there in the mud and look up at her and let the silence ring, and she, mistaking the way I stared for the dumb confusion of a rescued animal, brushed the wet fur back from my eyes with a shaking hand and said, gently, "Easy, you're all right. You're all right now?" And I thought I would break apart from the tenderness of it. This woman who did not know she was speaking to her king, speaking so to a stranger she had nearly died to save. Behind her the flood still tore past, and I saw over her shoulder what she had done. They were laid out along the bank, all of them, the wolves she had pulled from the water. A dozen and more, streaming and shivering, coughing up the river, some already staggering to their paws, some being warmed by the ones she had saved before them. The gray cub, my cub, the one I had gone in for, was there among the highest of them, safe, pressed shivering against a yearling's flank. She had set him there first, before ever she came back for me. And I understood, lying in the mud with the silence still ringing in me, that this slight Marsh girl whom my own marshal had waved off the line had gone into the killing flood the instant the ford broke, and had simply not come out again until every wolf she could reach was on the bank. 15 of them. She had pulled 15 wolves from a flood that had taken grown warriors down like reeds, and she had spent the last and hardest of her strength on the 15th, on a great dark half-drowned stranger she did not know from any other on me. She swayed where she knelt. I saw it, saw the cold and the spending finally reach her, saw her sway and catch herself on one hand in the mud, and still she would not stop. She turned her head, counting her rescued down the line with her eyes, and only when she had counted them all and found them living did she let her shoulders come down, and she pressed her forehead once more to my wet skull, and I felt her whole body shaking against mine, and she whispered to herself, I think not to me, not to anyone, all of them. I got all of them. Then the marshals came. I heard them before she did, the hard splash of paws, the shouts, Aldous' voice above the rest. And then men, the pack's runners in their 2-legged shapes, come down the bank at last from the high ground where they had fled the flood. And here is the thing I will never forgive myself for, and never stop being grateful for, both at once. They did not know me either. You must understand what a king looks like, half-drowned. I was a great dark wolf like any other, mud to the eyes, broken and streaming, indistinguishable in that chaos from any beast the flood had chewed. My crown does not travel on my fur. And so the marshals came down that bank and saw a Marsh girl crouched over the wolves, and they did not see their king among the saved. They saw the reed folk where the reed folk were not permitted to be, in the middle of the run, her hands on the pack's own wolves. You, Aldous said to her, and there was no cruelty in it, only the flat certainty of a man who has always known the shape of the world. Off the line, this is the long race. Your kind don't touch pack wolves. Get back to your marshes. I want you to sit with that a moment because I have had to. This man had just watched his king's run swallowed by a flood. Half the front runners were dead in the water behind him. And the girl who had emptied herself, pulling 15 of the living out of it, he looked at her and saw a trespasser. Not because he was wicked, because it had never once in all his life occurred to him that a reed folk girl could be anything but low. The world he had been handed told him so, and I had handed it to him, king before him and king before that, all of us waving her people off the line for 200 years. She got to her feet. It cost her, I saw what it cost her, her legs barely under her, but she got up out of the mud and stood before him, small and streaming and swaying, and she did not argue and she did not beg. She simply said in that same low, steady voice she had used on me in the water, "The ford was going to break. I told you it would break. I read the current at first light and I came to tell you and you sent me back to the reeds." A breath. I couldn't stop the flood. So I pulled out the ones I could reach. And Aldous, good Aldous, loyal Aldous, who had run at my flank for years, looked past her at the shivering wolves on the bank as if seeing them for the first time, and his certainty flickered, just for a moment, and then he did the thing that men do when the world tips under them and they cannot bear it. He shut it out. "That's not for you to say," he told her. "High water's no place for marsh folk. Go home." And he turned from her to see to the pack zone, and the other marshals turned with him, and not one of them thanked her, and not one of them helped her, and she stood alone in the mud with her rescued all around her, unhonored, waved off a second time. I lost the last of myself then. Whether it was the cold or the ribs or the sheer helpless fury of it, I do not know, but the world went out again, and the next I knew of anything, I was warm and dry and lying on furs, and it was night. I woke in the healer's tent at the sanctuary. I know now that they had carried the saved up to the high ground once the crest passed, and that some hours in the healer's hands, someone had finally looked close at the great dark wolf with the broken ribs and gone white and dropped to their knees because the great dark wolf was the king. I know there was an uproar over it. I know my council nearly came apart at the seams. The king swept from the run, the king half drowned, the king alive by they knew not what. I slept through all of it mending, and while I slept the story of how I had been pulled from the water traveled the sanctuary from tent to tent, and grew and changed, and lost the only part of it that mattered. Because when I woke and shifted at last to my two-legged shape, weak as a new pup and wrapped in a healer's furs, and I asked the first question, the only question that was in me, I asked who had pulled me from the river. And my council, gathered anxious around my bed, told me a name I did not know. A marshal's name, one of Aldous' runners, a stout, brave wolf who had indeed gone into the shallows and dragged two of the saved to the bank near the end. They had decided, in their retelling, that a pack wolf must have saved the king, because it was unthinkable that anything else had. And so the truth had been quietly, comfortably, painted over, and a pack wolf given the honor, and the Marsh girl written out of her own rescue as cleanly as if she had never waded in it all. I lay in those furs and I listened to them praise the wrong name, and the silence the bond had put in me the moment I saw her rose up and became something else. It became a cold, clear, terrible focus. I remembered the two hands fisting into my fur and hauling me up through the black. I remembered the breath forced into me. I remembered her forehead against my skull and her voice that would not stop. And all of them, I got all of them, and the grays down her cheek, and the gray blue of her lips where she had spent her own warmth on a stranger, and Aldous saying, "Go home to the one soul who had read the flood true." "No," I said. They stopped, they looked at me. "It was not him," I said. "It was a Marsh girl, reed folk. She dove from the reeds at the 9th bend, and she pulled 15 of my people from the water, and she breathed the life back into me with her own mouth, and your marshals waved her off the bank and told her to go home." I pushed myself up on the furs, though it tore at my ribs to do it, because I would not say this lying down. I felt the bond for her while I was drowning. Do you understand what I am telling you? 11 years, and it came to me in the mud of the 9th bend, from the hands of a woman this pack does not think is fit to stand on its ground. You have never heard a tent go so quiet. And into that quiet, because I had to know, because I was already afraid of the answer, I asked the last thing. "Where is she now? Bring her to me." There was a long, terrible pause. And then the eldest of my council, a gray old wolf named Merk who had served my father, looked at the ground and said the words that put the whole shape of my kingdom's shame in front of me at last. "Lord, we cannot," he said. "The reed folk are not permitted within the sanctuary walls. They never have been. She would have carried your people to the high water's edge and turned back at the gate with all her kind." He would not raise his eyes. "The Marsh clan are barred from the sanctuary, my king, by your law, by your father's law and his. She saved 15 wolves and your own life at the ford, and then she walked back down into the flooded country, because there was no gate here that would open for her.